Crystal, what are you taking a look at?
Well, guys, we're seeing stunning images over the weekend from the South Asian island nation of Sri Lanka, where enraged protesters stormed the presidential palace and forced that nation's leader to flee. Now, I want to show you some of these images because while today it is protesters demanding the resignation of the Sri Lankan government, this country is far from alone in suffering with high fuel and high food prices. And in Sri Lanka, it was this last one more crisis which led to an absolute breaking point for this nation's people. All right, so you can see here, massive crowd, tens of thousands of protesters gathered outside the presidential palace that is in the capital city of Colombo, and ultimately storming through the gates and taking it over completely. All right, now here you can see some of those protesters inside the palace, inside the presidential kitchen there, helping themselves to food and drink. Many of them have probably been hungry for quite a while as food scarcity and prices are a major issue. Now you've got protesters also making themselves at home, wandering around, putting their feet up, taking selfies, enjoying, the rare experience there in the lap of luxury of the presidential palace. And this, allegedly, is the current president fleeing for his life, boarding a military ship as protesters relax in his palace. So, what happens now? Now, protesters are demanding the resignation of top officials. It looks like they're going to get their way. The prime minister has already tweeted his resignation. President is expected to resign on Wednesday. But the factors that led to this nation being in complete chaos, which life is a daily struggle for survival, are not going away anytime soon. So how did they get to this point? Well, some of the factors are super specific to this nation. The downward spiral actually really started in 2019. There was a major ISIS attack on 3 churches and critically on 3 luxury hotels, which killed 269 people, including scores of foreign nationals. That attack put a massive chill on the country's burgeoning tourism industry. That is, of course, a key source of foreign exchange. Next came COVID, which, of course, further destroyed the nation's tourism industry. And in crisis, the government made several completely disastrous decisions. So in a wrong-headed attempt to reverse the flow of currency out of the nation, Sri Lanka banned all import and use of fertilizer. That in turn devastated their storied tea industry as productivity plummeted, and also made it so for the first time in history, Sri Lanka could not feed itself, leading to the need to import food and further exacerbating that foreign exchange crisis. In another completely disastrous move, the government also passed a massive tax cut in an attempt to stimulate growth. Predictably, it did not stimulate growth. Instead, it just robbed government coffers of funds that they desperately needed to stay current on their debt payments. Next came the war in Russia, which had a triple whammy effect on Sri Lanka. Not only are they suffering with the high gas prices, the high food prices that have all been accelerated by the war, but Russians and Ukrainians were actually disproportionate contributors to Sri Lankan tourism. So the loss of those travelers has been a further disaster for the nation. The international community then downgraded Sri Lankan debt, making it impossible for them to borrow for importing food and importing fuel. They were unable to make their debt payments, leading to an official default as the government went bankrupt. And all of this together means that daily life has just become an absolute misery for almost everyone. Lines for gas can last for 2 days. Hospitals have run out of life-saving medicines, leading to a health crisis that experts say might be more deadly for them than COVID was. Food inflation skyrocketed to 80% last month, and nearly everyone has been forced to reduce what they eat as prices spike and food scarcity grows. Blackouts in the sweltering heat have become a normal part of daily life. But unfortunately, Sri Lanka's problems, they increasingly find echoes in nations around the world. Now, I recently told you about a general strike in Ecuador led by indigenous farmers who are demanding debt relief and price relief. The Wall Street Journal name-checks Zambia, Lebanon, Laos, and Pakistan as countries that are facing similar conditions to Sri Lanka with high debt loads, high inflation, and increasingly desperate populations. Bloomberg is reporting that in addition to Pakistan, El Salvador, Ghana, Egypt, and Tunisia are also struggling with debt payments and in danger of default. In fact, the number of poor nations with sovereign debt trading at distress levels, that has doubled in just 6 months. Now, one thing you may not know is our own Federal Reserve policy is actually making life even more difficult for the 19 nations that now have distressed debt. As we increase our interest rates, that means the value of the dollar surges, making it more difficult for countries to service their dollar-denominated sovereign debt. Contagion, also a real danger here as well. As nations like Sri Lanka start to default, it can lead to a sort of investor run on developing world bonds, triggering a domino effect of defaults. There are already indications that this process is underway. Now, some of these countries are already experiencing growing protests. There are now effectively bread riots in countries from Argentina to Albania, Kenya, Panama, and Ghana. This, of course, is exactly what we have been warning about here. After COVID disruptions, lockdowns, and illness, things were already precarious. For how many nations will the war in Ukraine be the straw that broke the camel's back? The war in Ukraine, which is contributing to spikes in food and fuel prices and making it difficult to acquire essential fertilizer. This is why it is so important to remember that the Ukraine war, while of course most devastating for the people in that nation, it is pretty damn devastating for a lot of people around the world. And that is why, overwhelmingly, our number one priority for this war should be to do what we can to end it. Because there are literally hundreds of millions of people around the world who are already at the brink. And the knock-on effects of this war are pushing them right over the edge. No nation will be spared from this catastrophe. And listen, again, some of the conditions in Sri Lanka are specific to them. Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.